Good morning, Alex. How's it going?
Doing well. Thank you. Excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Uh, you all announced HRF and Strike announced this initiative last or earlier this month before Christmas. So really excited to be able to kind of tease out what went into making this happen and what you're looking to get out of the different I guess bounties that you're putting out there with Strike. So excited to hear from Jack and the rest of the Strike team as well.
100%. So maybe we'll give them a minute.
Yes, sir. I guess while we're waiting, just going to talk about Bitcoin 2022. April 4th or 6th through the 9th. It's going to be an entire week dedicated to Bitcoin over in Miami Beach, Florida. Absolutely cannot miss event. Alex is going to be there speaking, and the HRF has quite a bit planned in terms of putting human rights in Bitcoin in the limelight at the conference. So I'm really excited for that. But there's just so many incredible things happening at the Bitcoin conference next year, and I've been a part, thankfully, of multiple Bitcoin conferences: Bitcoin 2019, Bitcoin 2021, and every single one has world changing, Bitcoin changing, career changing moments throughout the event. So if you're serious about the Bitcoin space, if you're in the Bitcoin space, you got to be there. A lot of the people that interact with every day here on Twitter will be at the event, and it's just an amazing opportunity. So don't miss out on the conference. Get 10% off. Use promo code Satoshi. Meet Alex, meet Odell, meet a lot of the other folks that you interact with on Twitter in person. And of course, have those game changing, Bitcoin changing conversations, in the meet space. It's really something special to get together with your fellow Bitcoiners and figure out how to move this thing forward.
Matt, what's up? Happy holidays.
How's it going, my dudes? Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you as well. I'm super excited about this space.
All right, looks like we almost have everyone. I see Rockstar, Uncle Rockstar's in the audience. Why don't you jump up here, Rockstar? I sent you an invite, and hopefully Jack can join pretty soon here too.
Cool. Well, maybe I'll just start with like the background to how this came together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Yeah, so look, over the last few years we've been at the Human Rights Foundation interacting with dissidents and activists and journalists all over the world and trying to get a sense of like kind of what they need out of Bitcoin and like why they're turning to it. And there seem to be like three areas that, I think are worthy of continued development that kept coming up in conversations with activists. Kind of like once we would tell them about Bitcoin, and generally speaking, human rights activists are very, very open to Bitcoin because, when you say that there's government money the government doesn't control, they're very intrigued by that because they tend to have a lot of problems with bank accounts, etc. And yet there's some usability issues, right? I came to Jack and to Rockstar. Welcome, Rockstar. How are you? He's here.
I'm
We
good.
got him.
I'm good.
So the point is that activists are increasingly using Bitcoin, but there's like a couple different areas where I think UX could improve dramatically. And we decided to team up to create bounties, which would incentivize open source developers to pursue these three kind of UX improvements. Looks like we got Jack here. Jack, what's up?
Alex, happy holidays, brother. What's going on?
Yes, not too much. Happy to have you here and talk with Rockstar and Odell about this bounty challenge program. And yeah, maybe hear what else you guys are cooking up with. But I was just giving the background to why these three kind of areas are kind of important for, let's say, activists around the world. And then maybe we can turn it over to you. But basically, like people really want like a tip jar. They want a tip jar. They saw what Twitter did with you guys. They love that, and they want a way to like have a wallet that they can just download and like basically press a button and have like a lightning tip jar. So we thought that incentivizing a Bolt 12 functionality and I'll let you guys describe, what that is. But basically, incentivizing developers to come out with a way for you just to download a free and open source wallet and like literally press a button and have a QR code that you can put anywhere, that you can receive Lightning in a way that protects your privacy and doesn't necessarily disclose like your public key. Like that would be really, really cool. So that's kind of the first challenge. I think we would all expect that challenge to be met. I've already heard from several wallet makers who are planning to implement this in the next month or two. So I would say you should expect that bounty to be claimed by, Q2 is my guess. Very quickly, just the other two challenges, and then we can dive into each one. A big one that we hear a lot is that like people really love Bitcoin, but they need to kind of like hedge the volatility. Say you're an NGO and you've received some Bitcoin because your bank account got frozen. Let's say you're in Russia or in, God, El Salvador, anywhere. You may want to keep that in dollars for now. I mean, we just aren't quite at hyper Bitcoinization yet, right? So dollars are still very important. This is kind of obvious to anybody who's ever talked to people in emerging markets. So right now, like people have to do a bunch of steps to go into like stable coins. It's convoluted, it's risky. How cool would it be just to be able to like peg your Bitcoin to dollars without having to enter kind of different financial systems? Like, so that would be kind of the end goal of the second challenge. That's obviously very ambitious. We don't know if that one will be claimed, but certainly work towards it would be cool. And then the third one addresses the privacy vulnerabilities in Lightning and in Bitcoin. And it's just this concept that like some folks, Eric, Simon at Blockstream and some others have been playing with this idea of like, you could make a trade-off from a non-custodial open source wallet by agreeing to like sort of peg into a federated system that would provide essentially perfect privacy or anonymity through sort of Chaumian eCash. And then you could be in that system and then peg out when you need to. So that would be huge, obviously, for activists, because while it's true that like authoritarian regimes, generally speaking, aren't really doing that much sort of, let's say, Lightning, analysis right now, like I rest assured that they will be doing that. So we want to be like, have people have protections. So those are these three things that like activists kept telling us they wanted, like a tip jar, like right now, like basically, and we love BTC Pay, but it is, something that we generally have to help people get set up with. So having like a sort of Insta BTC Pay was, a request. Having the ability to like just kind of peg the value of Bitcoin to dollars was a request, and having more privacy was a request. So anyway, that's what we learned from the activist side.
I pinned all of Alex's kind of tweets detailing out these three bounties to the top. So feel free to click into his tweet thread from last week to see the details. But Jack or Rockstar would love to go to you to kind of talk about these three different initiatives and, what you're looking to see out of this.
Yeah, I'm open to discussion whatever you guys want, any in particular or collectively. I think there's just a lot of overlap in a lot of my mental models and thesis about Bitcoin as a unified payment standard for the world and how it can drastically improve financial inclusion. And so I think all of them individually are great and collectively really aim towards some similar goal or objective or vision for success. And so, yeah, I don't know. You guys tell me if you want to dive into the Bolt 12 stuff, trying to find some interoperable way for people to have some cash collateral, but leverage an open global payment standard. And then also the Chaumian stuff is very interesting.
Well, why don't we start with Bolt 12? Like, why do you like Bolt 12? What intrigues you about Bolt 12?
Yeah, okay. Well, so I think just a brief history on the Lightning Network specification, the Bolt spec. So I've been spending a decent amount of time with Rusty. He's just good friend and good dude from Blockstream, and like just way smarter than me. That's all. It's the best friend to have. And he was one of the primary authors, if not the singular author behind Bolt 11. And collectively in the Lightning community, it was always known that that wasn't the end goal desired user experience, right? As you kind of have this handshake of sorts where you request your recipient, like there's a handshake of actually making a payment as opposed to having something static that can be remained interoperable. And so there's been various efforts throughout the community there's LNURL, there's all these things for what we all collectively, I think, desire the UX to be. There's privacy enhancements, but then ultimately just lowering the barrier to interoperability. And in my opinion, interoperability, again, to what I deem to be the singular payment standard for the entire planet. My thesis is that if the internet is the singular standard for communication globally, I think Bitcoin and Lightning and whatever tooling we build on top will be this singular global standard for monetary settlement and for payments. And so I think there's just a collective desire to improve the UX, improve the privacy constraints, and lower the barrier of standard to remain interoperable, especially in more emerging markets or lesser privileged markets, to where my iPhone 45 that's going to be able to mine Bitcoin because of whatever the Jack Dorsey's working on, maybe that's not a privilege everybody else has. So from a very high level, that's the way I think about it. And I think Bolt 12, in my opinion, is it's the most promising solution that I'm most excited about. And when I was joking with Rockstar, I'm expecting to get into some LNURL debate, but that's why, from a high level, in my opinion. It's kind of a long time coming too, by the way, is that I think everyone in the Lightning community, there's no disagreement that Bolt 11 wasn't going to be here forever. And there are a lot of issues, and you can ask Rusty, who wrote it himself. And so it's just a natural progression. And I would love to see a wallet implemented. I'd be happy to fund that effort, really.
Maybe Rockstar or Odell could comment on this area.
A major aspect of what we've seen when working with activists around the world is this donation use case, that they want to receive donations easily. And we see a lot of the traditional finance donation ramps becoming heavier and heavier on censorship and deplatforming. So the need is obviously there in terms of people being able to, with relatively little friction, receive donations from around the world. Now, currently, the two main ways people would do that is they'd either post a static Bitcoin address, just a regular on-chain Bitcoin address where the whole world can see every donation that's made to you by just putting it into a block explorer. We've seen Navalny's team in Russia do that, where both Putin and the rest of the world can see all the donations. They can see the amount, and they could potentially use that chain data to track people that donate to the cause, as well as any kind of use of that Bitcoin going forward. So a better method is, in terms of privacy, is to spin up a BTC Pay server. But not only does that have friction, if you're in an adversarial environment, it might not be possible for you to easily get access to a always online server, especially if you don't want to do it in a KYC way where you're doxing your identity and your government or another adversary might be able to determine who you are. So not only does that have friction, but that has privacy implications and accessibility implications. So the ideal situation would be to have a very easy way for people to accept Lightning donations without running an independent server. And Bolt 12 seems to be, all trade-offs considered, seems to be the best way forward there. And that's kind of what this initiative's goal is, right?
Yeah, Matt, Anthony Ronig did a great piece on Lightning privacy earlier this year on the vulnerabilities. Can you just give a TLDR on like why Bolt 12 helps a little bit in this area, versus where we are today or maybe 6 months ago?
Well, I mean, look, it's important to realize that Lightning is still a very new project. It is nowhere near finished or set in stone. And as a result, there's a lot of privacy nuances with using it, and there's a lot of gotchas. But all things considered, it's a massive improvement in terms of transactional privacy compared to the traditional financial system or even just regular Bitcoin on-chain transactions. And so it's important to realize when it comes to Lightning privacy that you're really distinguishing between two different sides, two different types of users, the sender and the receiver. All things equal, senders on Lightning have much better privacy guarantees than receivers. When a receiver is running, they're always on Lightning node. That node is obviously publicly visible. When they create an invoice, that invoice gives a static public key that identifies the node. That public key can be used to see what kind of Lightning capacity they have on the network, how much Bitcoin they have on the network, on the Lightning network. It can also be used to figure out their IP address if they're not running Tor only. So one of the biggest privacy improvements that you see with Bolt 12 is this idea that static public key that identifies the node is not visible within the actual QR code. Right now, if you do a text-based invoice or a QR code-based invoice using Bolt 11, that public key is completely visible. And then, as I said, you can use that to determine the location of the node if it's not using Tor or the channel balances.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to get Jack's perspective also on this, like LN URL versus where we could be. But I mean, for the person listening who doesn't really know the details about Lightning, the idea is essentially you can print a treasure map to your treasure chest without exposing to the world really, where exactly it is, but the software knows how to get there. So it protects your privacy and allows anyone to tip you. And it's in line, I guess, with Jack's thesis about having this like open standard where, it's kind of like email for money. Like, anybody can connect regardless of what client they're running and be able to send you a private payment. That's kind of where we're trying to get to, but interested in Jack's thoughts on that.
Yeah. All right. It wouldn't be a Spaces with me if I didn't go on some unasked for rant. So you got to hold me accountable, Alex. But here are my thoughts. First of all, I think that we collectively should be at peace knowing that if we have a singular standard that's open for the world to achieve finality between each other monetarily, then the perceived winners over time will be those that build the best experience and the best brand. And I'm kind of guessing, but I'm also kind of not, because that's what happened with the internet. I have a Facebook account and not a MySpace account because they ended up building the better experience and brand for that collective part of the internet on top of that global standard for communication. And I think we're moving in the same way for money. Let me put it to you this way. I don't use JP Morgan Chase because I love the experience and the brand. I don't think anybody does. I have to use them, or Citibank or whatever, and it's because I have to. But in a world where I don't have to do shit, all I have to do is be interoperable with the global standard. Then it's kind of the consumer's picking of what experience and brand do they want. Do they want more privacy? Do they want more cheaper fees, more cash back? I don't know. And my point in that is that we don't have to sit and disagree and being like, you're going to ruin the world because you don't like LN URL or you don't like Bolt 12. No, the actual collective, the consumer is going to get to dictate and decide the market. If the consumer preferred MySpace, Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't be a fucking billionaire, right? Like, so that I think we should all be very happy that we finally have a singular standard that's open for everyone to compete for the consumer's experience and their preference, and that there is no right or wrong answer. Eventually, over time, like the consumer and the actual users will dictate that. The power is in the consumer, which is what makes the internet such a beautiful place and drives innovation in perpetuity. So with that being said, I think it's underscored that we're all working on delivering an amazing interoperable experience to this global monetary standard that's open. And so I think Bolt 12, LN URL, all these things signal to me very clearly that the experience could be better. And I don't think anyone disagrees on that. My only slight disagreement, and this may be a hot take, is that LN URL implies a required web server to be on both the sending and the receiving side. And I just have I wouldn't say I disagree with the notion at all, to be clear. I'm a fan of LN URL, big fan, and like deeply appreciate all that have been working on it for a very long time now. I just wish there was more open conversation about some of the perceived risks that incentivizes, I guess. Because if you're going to say that the world is going to move from independent, bifurcated, regionalized monetary networks that are not interoperable with each other and require a tremendous amount of intermediaries and correspondent banking and all of these things to remain functional globally, and we're going to move into a singular standard. And in order to be interoperable with that standard, you need an online web server all the time. Yes, are there a lot of people on Bitcoin Twitter that are going to run BTC Pay server and host it themselves? Yes. Well, how are you going to get the domain to actually interface with the web and host the web server? Are you going to do that yourself? Probably not. I think the market size of those that can remain solely independent and actually have the optionality to is very small, wherein I think in reality, you'll end up seeing like a lot of people come to Strike, a lot of people come to Cash App, a lot of people come to when PayPal becomes interoperable, right? And I find that maybe dangerous as it becomes a regulatory choke point. I was having a conversation with the very senior executive of a big finance company and really urging them, like, you need to get interoperable with the standard. It's kind of, everyone can smell blood in the water. It's kind of like a get murdered or do the murdering. Like, there's a giant change happening in money. And he gave me a piece of advice that I took very seriously. He said, listen, Jamie Dimon is not going to compete with you on the Lightning Network. If you think that you got him where you want him because you know Lightning better than him, you're wrong. He's going to compete with you in Washington, D.C. That's how he plays. And you have to be very careful. And so my only thing is Bolt 12 doesn't require a web server, and we can backpatch and append as a fallback all sorts of web standards into the back of Bolt 12 as a fallback. We can append any metadata we want. And I think that that's much more reasonable, is that at the base level where if you're in a suppressive regime or an emerging market, or you're an activist that's being censored in some way, you're not necessarily incentivized to go to some central web server to remain interoperable with what will be the global standard. And it allows us a little bit more flexibility and allows us to retain some of the core incentives of the services. Whereas, listen, if you're one of a big public company that wants to deliver an amazing experience to the developed world of the United States, fantastic. I think a web server is great, and I guarantee you in not much time in the future, it's going to be highly regulated, and Jamie Dimon will lobby DC to take down all of the web servers that are hosting LNURL, right? Of course. But I think it's a little bit dangerous, because I do also think that we're all going to consolidate onto one standard. I think we will have failed if I go to check out somewhere and there's 15 different Lightning QR codes, because there's LNURL 1 and this one, the pink version, and that it doesn't do us justice to innovate and consolidate onto one consensus standard. And it requires anyone who wants to build an interoperable service to be interoperable with 15 different standards. That's really difficult, and that's not going to work. And so these type of decisions, I think, are really, really material, really important. And for me, we're talking about how inclusive and private and accessible can we make an amazing interoperable experience. And so I just want to see a little bit more conversation about, yes, there's LNURL and there's Bolt 12, and eventually the market. We have the luxury of the fact that the market and the consumer is going to dictate and pick the winner. And that's beautiful. That's what the internet has. And that's not what money has today, but that's where it's going. That's my opinion and my thesis. And so we can rely on that there's no right answer. And I just think that that's a very serious conversation, is like, do we want the future of the monetary standard for the world to, be done on online permanent web servers? Is that something that we're confident as a community we're okay with? Because if anything, I'm incentivized the most to integrate LNURL. I think everyone would everyone would like Strike's web servers, but I'm a little sensitive to having the level of conviction that maybe others are, and I see Bolt 12 as something that I don't have as many questions about. But ultimately, like, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I could be very wrong about that, but that's why Strike hasn't integrated LNURL yet. I mean, to be honest, we're working towards it. We have a lot of discussion and a lot of engineering efforts that are working towards it. But that's why I was very confident to say, I think no matter what, I think Bolt 12 has a place in this world. And yeah, I guess rant over. Hopefully that made sense.
Yo, what is going on, plebs? We're going to take a break from our programming to tell you about the resurrection of our print magazine, starting with the El Salvador issue. Starting this fall, Bitcoin Magazine will be available on newsstands nationwide and at retail stores such as Barnes and Noble. Don't want to get off your couch, though? No problem. You can also go to store.bitcoinmagazine.com. So skip the line and get each issue shipped directly to your front door with our annual subscription. I'm talking 4 issues a year that contain exclusive interviews and profiles with leading Bitcoiners, actionable insights on the state of the market, breaking news and cultural trends, along with powerful photos and artwork from the best artists in the world. Subscribe today and get 21% off using code podcast at checkout. That's PODCAST, podcast at checkout.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to get Rockstar's opinion, but just to recap, because there's a lot of people listening here, Strike and Href teamed up to create 3 Lightning bounty challenges aimed at 3 areas where we really feel like Lightning UX could improve based on conversations with especially human rights activists around the world. They relate to privacy, donations, and ability to peg your value to dollars. We're talking about the first challenge, which relates to the ability just to download a free and open source Bitcoin wallet and print with like one click a QR that you can paste anywhere, tattoo on your body, print out and put on your coffee shop, put in your, pin to your Twitter profile or IG profile, whatever, and receive private Lightning donations. And I think that's kind of the goal. And Jack was just discussing some architectural choices as to how to get there. I just want to say on Ahrefs' behalf that like we think LNURL is awesome. We've supported LNURL devs, and we accept Bitcoin donations via LNURL. But I think pretty clearly it's not like where we're all going to end up. There's vulnerabilities on it, and as Jack's saying, it requires interactivity. So Rockstar, why don't you talk a little bit about this, and then maybe we'll move on to the one of the next challenges.
I actually wish I was here to discuss the part where you're talking about BTC Pay server, because in that race I have a preference. In this one, not
No,
really.
we were just to recap, we were just saying how awesome BTC Pay server is,
Oh, no,
but that activists need a little bit of an easier solution, let's say.
Yeah, but when we talk about BTC Pay server, the thing is there is not much that BTC Pay server crew can do really. Like it's more about how do you host infrastructure and maybe creating a standard on, when it comes to that. But to keep on topic when it comes to Bolt 12 versus LNURL, I would just echo what Jack said. It's not up to us here yet to pick winners, but just be conscious that decisions that we make and um, software that we implement will have far-reaching consequences. And I'm quite glad not to be the one driving conversation, but rather participating and listening to other people, because I've been having this conversation a lot on TabConf, Bitcoin conference. I'm really looking forward to next Bitcoin conference, because I think it will be one of the topics that people will discuss. And then on HRF organized a great Bitcoin corner this year. So no, I'll switch to listening more and see how I can help as an open source contributor.
I just want to say I'm super excited to be talking about that at Bitcoin 2022.
Yep.
You're going to be there as a speaker. Jack's going to be there as a speaker. Matt is going to be there as a speaker. Gladstein's going to be there as a speaker, and we're definitely going to be going into Bolt 12.
Yeah, I also, Alex, if you don't mind, another point I think
Go
is
for
really
it.
interesting. Yeah, but you're the only one that's gonna hold me accountable here and be like, "Yo, Jack, you gotta shut the fuck up. This is not interesting." But it's
Come
another
on,
thing
I'm
I
the
think is
uncle.
super, or my uncle. Okay, I think this is also really interesting though, because I think so. What we know is a very awesome property of Lightning is that there isn't a reliance on consensus, and what that means is that if you have multiple implementations at the Bitcoin protocol layer and there's a bug that interferes with consensus, we split the chain, and that's terrible. And so there's a reference implementation, and we really optimize for one implementation, that's Bitcoin Core. For Lightning, that's not true. It is not a broadcast system, it's a link-to-link protocol. And so we can allow for as many implementations as we want, and if they fall out of line with the spec or something, it could, be not great, but it's never going to be a disaster. And so that fosters more innovation. It is a layer that's optimized for more speed and cost that allows for payments, and developers are more attracted to it. I think that's great. Something that I find really interesting is for those that were around in the block size war days, we had this kind of what Michael Saylor calls cyber hornets, so to speak. And it was amazing because we are all protecting of this one monetary policy that we refuse to ever, ever, ever get construed with and changed. And so we are defendant of the monetary policy that was set in stone when Satoshi mined the first block and started Bitcoin. For Lightning, that's actually not the case. Like what I find interesting is when we have these community disagreements with Lightning, there isn't that level of like, who are the Lightning cyber hornets? Like the monetary policy doesn't extend itself up to the Lightning layer. Like, we could fuck something up on Lightning, and there's still only going to be 21 million Bitcoin. The block times are still, the difficulty, everything is going to be the same, right? And so what I find like really, really interesting is I find these debates like very material. Like, we could be 10 years down the line and realize we're in a Washington, D.C. lobby because 87% of everyone in the world that's interoperable with Lightning is running through 5 web servers because they're the top 5 public fintech companies in the United States. I think we will have looked back and been like, shit, that we kind of fucked that up. But there isn't a level of cyber hornetness because we're in a link-to-link protocol where Bitcoin as an asset is still going to be fine. I look at this as Bitcoin more as a monetary network that can be accessibly used for payments. And so I wonder, like, how do we collectively as a community evaluate these trade-offs? Because the reality could be we don't really care as much. And that it turns out that the value of Bitcoin is the monetary policy and the asset, and that people are going to, in perpetuity, long after I even die, be fiddling on top of it with various trade-offs. But I find that really interesting, is there isn't that level of defendability, I guess. And so one of the things I was talking with Steve Lee at Spiral, I've really been trying to have these conversations as to where do these discussions live? Because back in the day, all I had to do was open Twitter and it was an absolute war zone, which was a great property and makes Bitcoin resilient. Nowadays, it's not the case. Not to say, by the way, I'm a huge fan of LNURL too. I think the experience is great and I use it. And so I'm not inciting a war. But I just think that difference is that this is the first time that we're talking about trade-offs that could have different incentives at the second layer of Bitcoin. And I find it just fascinating that there are different properties in the discussion and in the debates because the monetary policy is not threatened at all. And I just find it interesting. And I think forums like this are really, really, really helpful. And I just wanted to highlight and promote the idea of some more public forum discussion. And one of the things Steve and I talked about was like, how can we collectively allow for healthier discussion about these topics? Because I don't think this level of discussion around the future of Lightning is given enough attention.
I just want to jump in and say I could not agree with you more. I think it's so important that, there's all the different implementations of the Lightning protocol. We've got C Lightning, we've got Eclair, we've got LND, and and they all get together and they discuss the specific directions that they are going to collectively take their separate implementations. But there's space for, people like Alex Bosworth to build out the Balance of Satoshi's tool, which allows you to implement, dual funded channels in a specific way. And for Nifty over at Blockstream to have a different approach, and, they're working on C Lightning, and there's a totally different way of, creating dual funded channels. And it's just, there are really, really interesting conversations and important ones, as you said, to be had around that. And I agree. We got to figure out the way for more people publicly to be able to be, or to at least view those conversations, because it's incredibly important.
Matt, I wanted to turn to you here. Look, we're going to conclude talking about the first point, maybe until Q&A. We set out a bounty for Bolt 12 tip jar. We all think it would be cool. That doesn't mean we don't like LNURL. It just means more options for users is better, and more privacy is better. On the topic of privacy, Matt, I wanted to go to actually the third bounty, because it's on the same topic, this idea of Chaumian eCash and kind of having it as an option inside of your Lightning wallet, because you've been curating a lot of conversations around that. I also wanted the listeners to understand why Matt was invited to be here. The basically judging as to whether or not a submission to this bounty will actually claim the bounty won't be judged by Strike or HRF on technical merit. It'll actually be judged by an independent Bitcoin third-party nonprofit called OpenSats, and Matt is on the board of that, and they've kindly offered to help with that. So that's kind of one of the reasons Matt's here. But yeah, Matt, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about Chaumian eCash and why it might be important for a Lightning user to have that kind of privacy?
First of all, I know I say it all the time, but I want to thank you and HRF for all the work you guys do in the space and supporting open source development. It's absolutely massive. And, a huge thanks to the team at Strike, Maulers, Rockstar for getting this donation and putting it to work. It's really a big deal, and I think it will have a massive impact. Yeah, so I mean, I was one of the co-founders of OpenSats, a nonprofit focused on supporting Bitcoin development and greater open source development that will hopefully help further the Bitcoin mission. We went through great lengths to select a 9-person board of ride or die Bitcoiners from all walks of life. Our board will be deciding when these bounties are claimed, whether or not they met the goals of the bounty before the payout happens. That will be a unanimous vote amongst our 9-person board. And I don't think we mentioned yet, but if any of these bounties do not get claimed, they go into HRF's general fund, where HRF will then decide, and they've been doing a great job, where to deploy that money for the best effect and the best impact across open source development in the Bitcoin space. As for the Chaumian eCash bounty, this is a really, really cool concept. It could have really massive ramifications. Currently, there is a developer that goes by the name of Eric Sirion, who's being funded by Blockstream, who has been working towards this goal and has kind of set the basic foundations for how something like this might look. The general idea is a mobile Lightning wallet that is very accessible and easy to use, that gives you very good privacy properties as well. And so it's not only it wouldn't only be a massive privacy boon to end users. One of the key aspects is the ease of use here. So the general idea is it would look something like a custodial wallet that a lot of people are used to using on Lightning already, something like a wallet of Satoshi or Blue Wallet's custodial Lightning implementation, where you have no channel management. You don't really have to know how Lightning works under the hood. You get to pay very low fees. Your transactions are instant and the UX is very clean. But the main negative of those custodial solutions right now is that you have to trust a single custodian with both your privacy and your funds. That custodian is able to see all of your transactions, and that custodian is able to take your money at will. And they don't necessarily have to take everybody's money at will. They can take certain individuals, small amounts here and there, and there's no really verifiable proof that you've even gotten robbed in the first place. So this model tries to mitigate some of those trade-offs while keeping the easy UX that those custodial wallets offer. It would give you privacy from the actual custodian, so the custodian would not be able to see your transactions and know your balances. You could still use it with a greater open monetary network that is the Lightning Network. You can pay any Lightning invoice. You can receive from any Lightning invoice. And then there's another element here, which we kind of made optional in the bounty, but is what Eric has been focused on, which is this idea of the custodians actually being federated, which instead of having a single custodian that so you're not trusting the custodian anymore in the Chaumian eCash model with your privacy, but you're still trusting them with your actual funds and them taking your funds, or a regulator coming down on them and being like, we know you have access to the funds, you need a KYC everybody, which adds friction, censorship, removes access, global access from people being able to actually access it. So the federated concept is this idea that and it's kind of similar to the way the Bitcoin Beach wallet currently works in El Salvador, is this idea of, instead of a single custodian, you'd have a group of custodians in a federation. You could imagine 15 custodians, and then there would need to be, you need a majority of them to collude in order to actually steal money or implement KYC, freeze transactions, stuff like that. Like a situation where you'd have like 8 of 15 would have to come together, so it would greatly mitigate and reduce that custodial risk in terms of funds. And the end result would be a mobile wallet that anyone can download anywhere around the world. If you talk about integration there with Bolt 12 as well, they can just download that wallet. They can take that QR code. They can have very private transactions, easy UX, posted anywhere they want, and instantly be connected to an open monetary network without having to run an additional web server.
Yeah, and let me give an example of like a use case for this. So for example, let's say you are a US foundation and you're making a grant to, or you're paying a translator or a coder who works for you who lives in Russia, where there's like this law that prevents any sort of foreign donations. You can get arrested for that. So you'd really not want Putin to know that you're receiving any sort of foreign funding if you're an activist or a coder in Russia, right? And you're working with, let's say, Strike or some company in the United States. So what your donor or your employer would do would be to download one of these wallets, get some Lightning on there, peg into this anonymous system, and then you in Russia would also do the same thing, and you would receive the anonymous eCash. And then that's Lightning though. So maybe you peg back out into traditional Lightning, and then you go to an exchange that accepts Lightning, and you can cash out if you want. But this whole idea is you can do this without divulging any sort of information about yourself. So the eCash idea is really quite cool. And again, we hope that a 1 Bitcoin bounty plus the sort of discussion it will create in the community will be worth it. So this one I would say is like quite possible. I would bet that we see someone try to claim this year, is my guess. Now I want to move. Jack, do you want to mention Rockstar? Do you guys want to talk a little bit about eCash at all, or this idea of anonymity?
I actually wanted to jump in because that challenge tree with eCash is my favorite one, and the one that, if I only had time, I would take on. But I must say, the federated aspect of it is, to me, the only way this will be, this will see production. One overarching thing that I'm noticing across all these challenges is that maybe they're more have to do with infrastructure rather than just coding, because and coding in such a way that it's easy to deploy these, how would I call them, nodes, especially for eCash, so that you don't have a single point of failure, which was always a problem with eCash systems, but rather that it is a federation. And yeah, I'm honest. Like, if someone takes this on and does it in a way where it's trivial to bring up necessary infrastructure, and then allow people to use their non-custodial wallets to enter into custodial arrangements with these instances, I think it will be phenomenal. And yeah, I would just tell people to reference, Gladstein, your Twitter, because it contains some interesting, like, additional information on each challenge. For example, that number one we talked about, tip jar, it should be done. QR code should not reveal the public key or IP address of user. There is so much important details that I want to make sure people don't miss.
Awesome. And Jack, if you're willing to chime in here, I think, look, I mean, I think there's options for people today to achieve privacy with different kinds of cryptocurrencies, or even with something like Liquid. Why should we be aiming for anonymity in the Lightning standard, in your mind?
Yeah, I guess I don't want to be like repetitive. With that being said, I'm going to be repetitive. I have this thesis, and it's really how I'm optimizing the time I spend on this planet, is that we have a singular standard for money for the world, like the internet for communication. And I think in the same way that the internet dematerialized all the communication, like internal, like all the newspaper publishing and the radio companies, all communications now on one standard for the world, I think the same is going to happen for money. And I think that there's going to be many competing experiences on top of a singular standard, which is what we want, because then the consumer has a Rolodex of experiences that they get to elect and subscribe themselves to. And I think that this is a worthwhile experience to exist on top of the singular global free instant standard for money, in my opinion. I think it's a very interesting trade-off, is that if you have the sense of pocket cash, you're willing to trust to a certain extent a custodian to actually custody the funds for you, so that maybe that's a public company, maybe that's a federation of a bunch of brands that you trust and rely on. And that, though, however, it allows you to be interoperable and transact in a more private way, I think that that is an experience that should compete on top of the open standard, and a consumer should be able to elect that. That it's really, again, I think the key to all of this in the future is interoperability to the singular standard. Like, I mean, I don't know. I was traveling recently for the holidays, and it's like, when I have to go on airplane mode, life is a lot different. I'm not interoperable with the internet, and my life kind of sucks. And so I think, it'll be a competition for the experience of interoperability. And who knows what people like, like maybe I build Strike and someone builds a similar service, but it's pink and they take all my customers because everyone likes the pink version more. Well, fuck, they good on them, good insight. And so I think, anyway, I think it's an interesting trade-off. It's a novel one. And I think that there's relative demand for it, according to a lot of people, including myself. And it should be supported to develop. And I'm curious to see the type of demand it attracts, really.
So with the first two bounties, we are aiming at improving the ability for you to receive a donation or income
Well,
from anywhere in the world. Matt,
Alex,
go ahead.
before we move on, just because I'm really excited about this Chaumian Cash bounty. If successful, this kind of represents one of like the holy grails of what we've been trying to achieve in the Bitcoin privacy community, because the result would be an experience that is easier and cheaper to use than a normal Bitcoin transaction or even a sovereign Lightning transaction, but gives you excellent privacy properties. Because if you expect people to go out of their way and use something that's more difficult and more expensive in order to achieve privacy, we've seen time and time again that people will not do that. So this kind of gives a natural incentive towards more private transactions on Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I also guess to that point too, in Lightning's history, it's one of the various trade-offs. Probably the most popular trade-off is people electing custodial versus non-custodial. And so today you see, like, whether we like it or not, there's a tremendous amount of demand for custodial wallets because the experience is better and it's easier. And there's a lot of work being done on allowing a similar experience, or at least one that's qualifying in a non-custodial manner. But it's much, much, much more difficult. And I think if there is a world where there's perpetual demand for custodial service, this takes a tremendous leap forward in enhancing base level privacy and allowing for it to exist in more suppressive authoritarian or in any environment that has any top-down constraints, I guess, if that makes sense. And so it's more accepting of the reality that there are going to be custodians, and given that that is going to be an experience that people have demand for, I don't know, at least as long as I'll be alive, that we can allow at least someone to subscribe to a custodial agreement with someone that they trust to custody, but not so much to oversee their transactions, and it gives them a level of privacy that doesn't exist today. I think that trade-off is really important, and it kind of helps meld the giant delta. I think the delta between non-custodial and custodial today is so wide, and we start to really decrease that or put things in between the delta. I think it's really interesting.
No, I'm thinking someone implements this challenge and then we hosted a strike. Although I think more applicable it will be that it's hosted on BTC Pay server or somewhere, but
one step at a time. If someone builds it, Strike would definitely be interested in being one of the federated members. One step at a time. Someone take the Bitcoin off our hands.
I mean, I think I would hope that the Signal team competes for this bounty. I think this kind of thing would be really great for Signal. And if you've been following Moxie online,
Yep.
I think that he's fairly skeptical of certain things about Lightning, but this kind of implementation would be kind of perfect for them. So I have hope that, when you go into your Signal, I know they have their own coin, but it does say kind of like, let's put it this way, the design there leaves room for other coins. So I think that this could be really neat to be added to existing sort of communications platforms. So if we could have this open Lightning eCash implementation, just plugging into all these different apps, that would be killer. So yeah, we can work towards that with this bounty.
My fellow plebs, the Bitcoin conference is back. Bitcoin 2022, April 6th through the 9th, is the ultimate pilgrimage for the Bitcoin ecosystem. The Bitcoin conference is the biggest event in all of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. We're leveling up and making this bigger and better than ever. I'm talking straight to the moon with the 4-day-long festival in the heart of Miami at the Miami Beach Convention Center. This has something for everyone. Whether you're a high-powered Bitcoin entrepreneur, a core developer, or a Bitcoin newbie, Bitcoin 2022 is the ultimate place for you to be with your people and celebrate and learn about the Bitcoin culture. So make sure to go to b.tc/conference to lock in your official tickets and use promo code Satoshi for 10% off. You want more off? Pay in Bitcoin and you'll receive $100 off general admission and $1,000 off whale pass. Those are stackable. So go to b.tc/conference and attend the best conference in Bitcoin history. Yo, my fellow Bitcoin lovers, have I got something specifically curated for you? The Deep Dive is Bitcoin Magazine's premium markets intelligence newsletter. This isn't some paid group shilling buy and sell signals. No, this is a premium Bitcoin analysis led by Dylan LeClaire and his team of analysts. They break down in an easily digestible way what is happening on chain, in the derivatives markets, and in the greater macro backdrop context for Bitcoin. This newsletter turns volatility into a joke. So hit up members.bitcoin.magazine.com and use promo code podcast for 30% off the deep dive. That's members.bitcoinmagazine.com, promo code podcast for 30% off. Divorce your pay group and learn why Bitcoin is the strongest asset by Dylan and LeClaire and his team.
Now, just to get to the third bounty, this is the one that the first two, by the way, are very important and I'm very excited about. But I think this idea of stabilized Bitcoin or Lightning is most compelling because it's really what people want. Like when you interview Bitcoin users in places like Lebanon or Palestine or Cuba or wherever, like they have like this need to like hedge into the dollar for what you could imagine. Just like, they don't want to ride the volatility for a week or two or whatever it is. And they want to have some sort of, stability. I know we can talk about the fact that even the dollar has significant inflation and we expect that to get worse. I think that's fine. But the reality is that like the inflation of the dollar is like relatively insignificant compared to what most people face around the world. Like in Nigeria, the currency is depreciated against food prices, against food by 25% in the last 2 months. So that's kind of like the kind of inflation that people are dealing with. So this idea of like, okay, I've received some Bitcoin. How can I like stabilize it for a little while? Like maybe without giving up control over it is so massive. And I've been exploring different stable coins and I've been trying to figure out ways of doing this without giving up privacy. And there are some, kind of workarounds. Like you can use this website sideshift.ai, which is certainly interesting. And you can, for example, like you can spend Lightning into them and you can receive Tether on Liquid and you can put it on a Jade wallet. I mean, that's kind of interesting. So there's different ways that I've been trying to look at this. But at the end of the day, what people would, I think, really appreciate, based on my conversations with activists, is an ability to have a very user UX friendly, beautiful wallet, like a Moon wallet type thing, and to literally just, press a button and have a slider and just choose to peg a certain percentage of their funds to the dollar. I mean, I think that's like really the end goal. And to Rockstar's point, this is a bounty that doesn't require just code. It requires kind of infrastructure and liquidity. But I mean, this one could just be massive. There's another point I'll just make before turning it over to Jack and Matt and Rockstar is that currently stable coins really support the dollar. And Lynn Alden did a really cool post on this yesterday, basically showing that like the big stable coins, generally speaking, have underlying that's backing them. That usually is stuff like US Treasuries. So she's basically explaining that like as stable coins rise in the coming years, they'll end up like essentially monetizing treasuries, US debt, and driving demand for that. And I don't think that like the Bitcoin project necessarily wants to do that. Like that's kind of where we already are, right? So can we have stable value that like users can optionally choose to peg to the dollar, like without supporting the existing banking system? Now that's interesting. And here's where we can take some of the stuff that the alternative cryptocurrencies have already achieved, and we can look at what they've done with regard to algorithmic stablecoins, etc. There's going to be some stuff in there to borrow from. But anyway, the point is that I think this bounty is probably the most kind of ambitious, visionary one, and I'm not sure if we expect it to be claimed in the next 12 months, but I'll certainly be excited to see any submissions come in. But yeah, I think it's a clear need of like millions and millions of Bitcoin users, and one that they would find really helpful. And who knows, there's also like interesting tax implications here. I mean, this is something that a lot of people would be excited to have as an addition to the Lightning product suite. So I'll end there, and maybe we'll hear from you, Jack, if you want to comment on this, and then we can go around the table here.
Yeah, well, I'm obviously a fan of this because this very closely mirrors the experience that was the first MVP of Strike, right? I developed this thesis. I have an internal conceptual division in my head that preferring to hold Bitcoin is different than being interoperable with the best monetary network in the world, and that the harder money will prevail, and that people will spend shittier money over time until we have one money, which is Bitcoin. But till then, the collective world has forms of cash collateral, whether it be euros, Japanese yen, dollars, Starbucks points, right? Like, and how can we allow for people that deem those relatively more stable or required to have a functioning life wherever they are, interoperable with the singular payment standard for the world? And so the first version of Strike was I linked my Chase account and I was able to make Bitcoin and Lightning payments with the dollars in my Chase account. And that was what, Rockstar and I built as a hackathon, almost 2 years ago today. And I think in the US, there's like a tremendous amount of licensing you have to do and a lot of work. And there's just the barrier to actually launch that is very high. But believe it or not, in the rest of the world, it's even higher. And that's generally an experience that's in high demand, is that, hey, I don't want to be exposed to all of the volatility that comes with Bitcoin, which is a great thing, by the way. It's a feature. For something to go up, it inherently has to be volatile. And so how can we do that in a way in which, one, doesn't require strenuous licensing programs and interfacing with the local banking infrastructure? Because I could tell you firsthand, it's fucking awful. And I would never, ever want to require that upon anyone that's trying to build something helpful for the world. And so I guess how can we mirror that experience or lean more into that thesis that allows for someone, I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to the individual. Do you want to be long Bitcoin? Okay, how much? And if for the ones that not, so let's say I have 100 units of whatever. If I want to be long 70 of those units Bitcoin, for the 30, does that mean that I'm on airplane mode, right? That I'm not interoperable with the global standard of the world that all financial services are going to migrate towards or die? Like, no, of course. Like, so how can we, I guess, make that more accessible, make it more inclusive, and ensure that there is a global solution that isn't required or regionalized under certain jurisdictions, certain laws, or certain banking relationships, or whatever cash collateral relationships. And so that's why I think it's just a really interesting idea, and it kind of leans more into the thesis of why I started Strike in the first place. And I think it would be a really attractive experience. So I guess I'll stop there, let everyone else talk. But
Couple things maybe for Matt or Rockstar to riff on. I could see a lot happening with this. First of all, you have maybe like a join market kind of maker taker thing happening where you're providing a service and you're being paid for it. Like if you want to be long Bitcoin and you just want to stay long Bitcoin, you could potentially be paid in this scenario a particular rate to provide your Bitcoin into a contract to allow someone to have dollar exposure, etc. So there could be interesting ways to make money off your Bitcoin through this. I also think that there could be like a interoperable standard where it's possible that like all the big wallets and maybe even exchanges eventually kind of pool together and you have this like, I don't know, it's kind of like this Bitcoin collateral pool that grows really, really large. I mean, look at how big Tether is today. I'll just give you an example. It's like 100 stable coins are about $150 billion today. Tether's like, the vast majority of that. So, I mean, you're talking like massive amounts of liquidity that the market demands this thing. And you could eventually, if you're talking about designing something on Lightning, where it's like the UX is a million times better than dealing with Tether, I mean, there's no limit here to the sky of what's possible. But anyway, Matt, go ahead, or Rockstar.
Yeah, I can jump in here because anything but Badger DAO, right, Gladstein? So
Yeah, maybe not, but go ahead.
yeah, our internal joke. But yeah, for this one, I'm actually quite curious about TBD and Mike Rock and what they're working on, because to me that the real decentralized exchange is the missing piece here, and I wouldn't make it part of the stabilized Lightning protocol. If I were coding it, I would code it as a separate service, separate protocol, because contrary to that challenge tree with Chaumian eCash, where you're custodying Bitcoin. Here you need to custody fiat in US dollars, and that's the really hard part. So on this one, yeah, this one would be the last that I tackle as a coder, but I'm looking forward to the conversation. I know in audience we have Chris Stewart from BitDevs Chicago, so next BitDevs Chicago, Chris, watch out. We're going to talk about this one, but
Yeah, but just to
I don't
clarify,
know.
the idea would be to have a system that is not reliant on a bunch of fiat sitting somewhere. That this would be done through a smart contract where it's essentially a contract for difference, and not like, you know, an asset that's backed by something somewhere else, right?
Yeah, but you still need exchange. How do you get that contract and that option? But yeah, I don't know. Matt, you want to follow up?
No, I mean, I think you guys did a pretty good job of explaining the goal for this one, and that the key point here is what Gladstein just mentioned, which is yes, people can currently use Tether. People are currently using Tether. If I'm not mistaken, when you guys decided to when you decided to open up Strike in El Salvador, you used Tether as the fiat piece, so you didn't have to interact with banks. But the problem with that is ultimately you have a single company that is controlling a ton of a ton of collateralized assets, mostly U.S. dollars, but probably also some elements of Bitcoin there because there's not that much transparency. They're a massive target for the U.S. government and other governments in terms of implementing KYC and other financial regulations, which exclude access to people. They can also steal your money at will. So the goal here is to put it as simply as possible, is to allow people to get access to this U.S. dollar that a lot of people really have demand for, without having a single central point of failure. And I would just add that, you know, to me, I view this as more of a shorter term goal, while the other two are basically foundations for the future. This, you know, ultimately, if we're correct about Bitcoin, as adoption increases, it should become less volatile. It should become more stable. It should probably become the most stable asset in the world. And at that point, people won't need a mechanism like this. They'll just be able to hold Bitcoin. But until then, especially in the developing world, especially among activists, there's a massive demand for holding value in dollars, and hopefully this can bridge that gap.
Yeah, and just to play into Jack's thesis here of like this big global open monetary network, just to consider how big this could be. I mean, we have dollars that the U.S. government creates, right? And that's become the dominant fiat currency through a variety of mechanisms. And then there's the euro dollar, which are dollars that the U.S. government doesn't create, which other private banks and entities around the world create. And those liabilities are now in the trillions of dollars. And some people have likened those to like actually the very first virtual currencies because they don't really exist. They're more just kind of like agreements to pay between parties, right? But the point is that the global thirst for the dollar is absolutely massive. And, you know, stablecoins and Tether basically being the, you know, 80-90% of it have already demonstrated that like there's whatever it is, $150 billion worth of demand for this thing. I mean, I think you could potentially have trillions of dollars of demand for this instantly settling, potentially, you know, privacy protecting digital cash that like any institution would be really interested in having. So, you know, we're basically talking about creating maybe the very, very bottom foundation, the very, very plumbing to what later could become almost a replacement for this whole kind of interbanking system. I don't think that the vision is any less big than that, but I don't know if Jack wants to comment there.
No, I agree. I think, I mean, if you're going to ask anyone on the spaces to be an opponent of hyper Bitcoinization, I don't think you're going to get a hand raised, right? I think, and again, I mean, from a very high level, I think like working around my thesis is that it's that we want to be supportive of as many experiences on top of this open standard. And then eventually consumers will drive themselves towards what is most attractive. And if you bet your whole life and refuse to iterate on a thesis that becomes invalidated, if it turns out that Alex, the research we've done with activists and in emerging markets, and the opinions that I have, that there are going to be people that hold assets other than Bitcoin. And I think that there's a market to build a really awesome experience that allows your Chase account to be interoperable with this global standard. If I'm wrong, well, I'll go out of business. And if I'm too stubborn to iterate and change, well, then I'll have to go, hopefully Cash App is hiring. I don't know, right? Like, I think it's an awesome thing. And I think, you can speculate on when hyper Bitcoinization is coming or not. But yeah, I think in lesser developed markets, activists, and there's a large part of the world that is in demand of this holistic experience. And I think this does a lot in making it more inclusive and accessible, and reducing a lot of the counterparty risks and aligning a lot of the more incentives. So for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. And now listen, whether the experience is actually valued by the market, I don't know. That's why free markets are cool. That's why open standards are awesome, is because we don't have to force people to use any intermediary, whether, if they don't like the experience. No, that's not a requirement anymore. The consumer can do whatever the fuck they want. And so I'm just a fan of funding and having the experience exist. And we'll see from there. But I agree with you, Alex. I think that there is, in my opinion, just based on my research, a solid amount of demand that I expect to exist throughout my lifetime. And so I would love to see someone pick this challenge up.
And these users may, today may want a lot of dollars. Like, you may have someone using, let's say, an app that competes in this competition, submits the bounty, gets claimed, and 2 years down the line really works really, really well. And maybe you're in Argentina and you start out and you're like, well, I'm kind of like 75% dollars. And then over time, you're like, and you can, when you talk to people in El Zante and El Salvador, they've already kind of gone through this over the last few years. They started off being like very skeptical of Bitcoin, and then kind of like they're more and more into Bitcoin as they go on, right? Maybe they're 50%, and then they're 25%. And, maybe this feature eventually becomes obsolete, and that would be great. But I think it's kind of, one thing I've learned is that, you have to be Bayesian, and you have to change your mind based on facts on the ground. And I was pretty skeptical of Tether and the value it serves to people around the world. And I think most people are. But the reality is that it serves a very important, humanitarian use case today. I mean, this is just not really debatable. So the question is, can we do better? So I think this bounty would set us in a really interesting direction. So with that,
Alex,
go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to ask, are we trying to open up the panel for the last few minutes here to some of the really established people in the audience? And two is, I wanted to point to some of the resources that my colleague P has posted to the top in the nest. If you want to learn about federated Chaumian Mints on Lightning, if you want to learn about Bolt 12, there's a lot of great resources posted up there too. So if any of that technical stuff went over your head,
why don't we take,
feel
like,
free to go there.
Maybe, I know because we all got to go, but maybe we take like 2 or 3 questions and then we can break, or I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I agree, and I already see this Twitter Spaces is making impact. Jack, check that Fiat Jeff is saying where Strike is integrating L and URL. But no,
there you go.
Give it over to questions. Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I invited a couple folks. Chris was raising his hand. I know he was putting out some threads on Twitter about this conversation.
You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay,
sir.
Great. Just like, I posted some food for thought on my personal Twitter for accomplishing the second bounty, where you have a fixed amount of dollars that gets settled in a Lightning channel. To actually build this, my company SuredBits is working on a new open protocol called discrete log contracts. They allow you to represent arbitrary financial contracts, and it's compatible with Lightning as well. We've built this protocol since the beginning with lifting this up to Lightning in mind. I just wanted to say, if you guys have some serious interest in implementing this, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my DMs and ask for engineering advice. I'd really like to see this achieved too. And, part of what our goal in the discrete log contract ecosystem is to start taking some of the market share away from other blockchains that allow you to represent arbitrary financial contracts. There's oracles involved, which is the kind of kicker here. But that's kind of how this stuff could work, and how you could go claim this wonderful 1 Bitcoin bounty that Strike and HRF has put up. So thanks for letting me up here, guys.
Next Chicago Bit Devs, Chris.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Chris.
Any thoughts on discrete log contracts in this use case for like pegging a dollar value on Lightning?
Well, I mean, one thing that I thought was a really interesting point between some of the panelists on the crowd, panelists when I was listening in the crowd is the difference between using an actual token to represent the dollar, aka Tether, and then just caring about price exposure to the U.S. dollar, which is what my understanding is what the spirit of this challenge is. DLCs allow you to represent price exposure to the dollar, but not actually physically settle into a token that represents a dollar. So there is a little bit of nuance there.
Yeah, but that's exactly what the euro dollar is. There is no end dollar. It's literally a price contract. So I think that what's really interesting is this whole idea or experiment builds on decades of monetary history. So I'm all for it. But thank you, Chris. You got another question here, CK?
Well,
Well, we got Shinobi.
I have
Shinobi
a
hit us.
question for Jack and Uncle Rockstar, who I keep blowing off collecting my stamp trumps. What kind of like regulatory nightmares do you think would pop up if Strike was to consider getting involved with like participating in a federated mint or a system like that? And like, do you guys even think that would be possible under U.S. regulations?
Shinobi, what's up, buddy? Merry Christmas, man. What type of regulatory? Jesus, dude. Strike's at a point now where I have a general counsel that is twice as smart. That's maybe being kind to me. 10 times as smart as I am. I'm not a big fan of the regulatory environment I have to operate up under to launch products that I think are helpful to people around the world. With that being said, I got to abide by them and, hopefully work in lockstep and changing the world with regulatory bodies. So I don't know, man. I know this isn't probably the most entertaining answer, but I really would be curious to learn myself. I think hopefully in the not too distant future, Strike is a part of something of the sort. I don't know. I feel like the laws change, or the opinions on how the laws are implemented, rather I say, change constantly. And that is why you have lawyers that are way smarter and cooler than you are. But that's kind of the responsible answer I got for you, buddy. Apologize.
I'll just say that I've heard from people who are pushing for this sort of thing that it's not impossible to imagine a world where the U.S. government is basically where we negotiate a very small kind of like threshold. I know Coin Center has been doing some work on this, where like if the mint, for example, was limited, for example, and I know that's not in the spirit of Bitcoin, but let's just say if it made the U.S. government like not care at all, and these transactions were below a certain dollar amount. From what I understand, that's a possible regulatory line. I think Signal is working on that, right? Because they've got their like private coin going, and that's a software that any U.S. citizen can use. So I think they're testing the waters there as well. But I don't think it's impossible.
Not to be so down about it, I guess that was such a cowardly answer by me. I guess like innovation is inherent in our species, right? Like that's why like we're a primate that like builds tools, and 100 years ago the world was not as cool as it is today, and 100 years from now the world will be cooler than it is today. And so inherent in that is the ability to build tools that are helpful and push the world forward. And so I think collectively all of our species, whether you're a regulator or not, wants to see that happen. That's just part of being a human being. And so in my conversation, I think, Alex, you're absolutely correct in that government bodies do see stablecoins as additive to the dollar and stuff. And so they're actually much more tuned in to a lot of these efforts. And as far as being part of a federated mint, I don't think that, like, I think there's just a general notion that everything is to be opposed, and it's just kind of like an arm wrestling match to fight through it. And I don't think that that's the case, right? I don't think the United States wants to push innovation outside elsewhere. And also, to be clear, Strike, we aim to be a global financial services firm. We have entities all over the world. We're not just strictly, I mean, of course, we're regulated here in the United States, but not strictly here in the United States. And so one way or another, the things I work on are going to prioritize making the world a better place. And I think you'd be surprised as to the level of opposition in allowing for that. But to be particularly clear about being part of some form of a mint. I have not engaged in any conversations that would be helpful to, I don't know how many people are listening to me talk right now. I don't have any like material
I mean,
tail
Jack,
on
it's
that.
kind of like it's kind of like gift card law. I mean, you think about the hundreds of millions of dollars that flow through gift cards, which are completely anonymous, essentially, meaning they can be bought with cash. That's kind of the tack I've heard people are going at, is trying to get this sort of software under kind of like, let's say, gift card law, like that. These are just going to replace gift cards in our society, and we're always going to have essentially like some sort of digital asset that can be traded that doesn't require, full KYC. So anyway,
Yeah.
I saw that as well.
Real quick, Jack. Like, trying to do the most you can without winding your pretty ass up in jail is not cowardly. It's called having common sense.
Appreciate that, buddy. That's why we're friends.
And also, I mean, I would just add, to be clear here, like it'd be great if we have a regulatory regime in America that allows regulated companies to participate in these types of federations. But one of the coolest aspects here is that we could have federations that are competing with each other, that exist in many different jurisdictions, exist in many different types of entities. And that's where it gets really interesting, because regulators might want to restrict it, but they're not capable of doing it in the first place.
Yeah, and if I may add on this topic, as an immigrant, the reason why I came to US is exactly that iteration and pushing what makes sense. And in general, this is something that I think it makes sense. And now Bitcoin is represented in US Senate. And the reality is, if innovation doesn't happen here, it happens somewhere else. And I guess none of us here on this Twitter Spaces want to see that happen, but rather we want to be agents of change and help launch products that make sense. So to me, this definitely makes sense. It's just, who is dying on a hill, or if we're letting people die on a hill. But we won't do that. As Matt said, we'll live on a mountain, right?
So I want to go to Bernard, and then after that we can close it out with Mark. But Bernard, welcome. Why don't you jump in?
Hello. Yeah, so great conversation, and I apologize if I take everyone back with this. I don't know if that's already been, discussed. That is stable coins. That's the second one. Stable coins on Lightning, or using discrete lot contracts. So I don't know if we, the way we think about it. So today, it's sort of really important for people from our part of the world that they're able to get out of Bitcoin instantly, right? And for some of them, they don't want to be able to just go to fiat. So they don't want to go to the naira, for example. They want to be able to stay in the US dollar. But then the way I think about stable coins right now, it's sort of a necessary evil, in the sense that we're talking about how do we displace the dollar? How do we, have this financial system outside of the dollar, and then sort of perpetuating the dollar by still having to, stay there. So I don't know if in the plans that we have for this, if we're thinking around, how do we essentially build this in such a way that at the end of the day, we are not, still promoting where we're trying to move away from. Thank you.
I'll take a hack at that. I mean, yeah, I think you're thinking about it the exact correct way. Is that there's general demand to be interoperable with the payment standard for the world, with the optionality to have a more stable exposure without taking on counterparty risk like Tether or something like that. It's that general experience. Is that too promotional of the dollar, I guess, is your concern, which would be in theory anti-Bitcoin? I don't think it's actually that cut and dry. In my opinion, I think there's so much nuance involved into where in which it actually allows for this theory to be reasonable. But we'll see. I don't know. I just think like ultimately people want to hold Bitcoin, they'll hold Bitcoin. And I also don't think like you're really incentivized to spend the Bitcoin that you have. And so that there should be services that optimize around the experience for a more stable collateral to interface with this open monetary standard. I think that that's just the general thesis. And I think this effort that we're trying to fund is more so removing the perceived counterparty risk of a regulated bank like Chase or a stable coin like Tether, is removing your reliance on that and getting you the price exposure that you want as an individual through more clever ways that reduce risk, counterparty risk, and position you in a way that could be disadvantageous, but ultimately one of the decisions that you have to make because it's, you know, what you elect to deem as the experience you want. And so I think, you know, we're trying to mirror an experience that we've seen a lot of demand for, and we've been able to verify with research and just reduce a lot of the risk involved, perceived risk, that is. And I don't see it as like a pro-dollar narrative at all. I mean, I think it's lesser about the dollar, really. It's whatever cash collateral that you deem more stable than just being 100% net long Bitcoin. That's really it to me.
Yeah, I mean, Bernard, I use dollar, and thanks for joining, by the way. Awesome work you guys are doing. Is that it's just obviously the monetary instrument that's in most demand, but like these contracts would be able to be easily switched to anything else. You want to use yen, you want to use whatever gold you want. I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult to create sort of different pools based on different assets. So CK, I just sent you the link if you want to post it up here in case folks want to learn more about the bounty. They can read about it at the Href website. These will be running for the next 12 months. Any bounties that don't get claimed, Href will commit to giving to devs in the first month of 2023. And yeah, thanks again to Jack and Rockstar and everyone at Strike for working with us on this. We're really excited. And thanks to Bitcoin Magazine for giving us the time, and looking forward to updating you on if anyone comes and tries to claim these bounties in the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you all.
All right. Well, that's a wrap.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And this is also funded by the community, by the way. It wouldn't be right for me to take a compliment like that. This is donations we got for the Bitcoin car that we're forwarding along. So this community gets a tremendous standing ovation. So thanks everybody, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Don't forget to check out Bitcoin 2022, b.tc/conference, the most incredible Bitcoin event ever in history. 30,000 Bitcoiners going to Miami. Let's go. Promo code
Why are you so
Satoshi.
bearish? Why are you so bearish?
50,000 Bitcoiners.
There we go.
We're gonna break the island. Miami Beach is going down. It's gonna sink because of the weight of Bitcoin. Promo code Satoshi. Be there.